listening to a Hope 1032 podcast.
I'm Collett Smart, and I'm a psychologist, a teacher, and your host on Raising Teens. I'm also a parent, and I'm in the middle of raising my own teens and young adult children. I know that raising teens can be fun and busy, but also terrifying and even lonely. I've experienced all of these emotions, sometimes in the same day. On this podcast, I'm joined by well-known experts, and we chat about some of the most common questions I get asked about raising teenagers in my own work, and even some questions I have myself. I have such hope for this generation of young people, so each episode is full of support and practical advice. I love seeing all your questions come in, so each season I focus on some that teachers, parents, and carers have raised. We're all caring for the teens we love so much, so please keep sending in your ideas and questions through my Instagram and Facebook page or via the Hope 1032 podcast webpage, so we can support this generation of teens together. In this episode, we're going to have Dr. Veya Seekis. You might remember Veya from some time ago when she was on the podcast chatting about TikTok and body image. Dr. Veya Seekis is a lecturer within the School of Applied Psychology at Griffith University and lectures in first-year introductory psychology. Veya also conducts research in the areas of social, developmental, and health psychology. She's conducted research in schools with teens from 12 to 18 and with young adults aged 17 to 25. Her research has been published in peer-reviewed academic journals, and she's been interviewed by the New York Times and the ABC on the impacts of social media on young people's body image, but also about how self-compassion may be one way to negate some of these negative impacts. And so I am so excited to have her back again this week to chat about her research on self-compassion. Hello, Veya. Welcome back to Raising Teens. I'm so excited to have you back again as a guest. You have got so much research that just fascinates me, and just off camera and off mic before, I was saying to you, I think you need to be a regular. I just love your research and what you're doing. So welcome back.
Thank you so much, Collett. And wow, what a lovely thing to say. And this is what we do research for, is hopefully to inspire people that do read it to kind of then put things into action. So thank you for having the podcast. Thank you for inviting me back on. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Yeah, there's a big push in academia to really get a lot of the research out so that it's actually usable, so it doesn't sit in with the brainy people in academia who are doing this incredible stuff, that it actually becomes something practical that people, particularly in my area, people in schools and parents know what's out there and kind of not have it years before we actually know about it and use it. We're actually doing it in our day-to-day lives because it's evidence-based.
Yeah, and so much of this has become really important in the research field. So now we don't just talk about citations and the academic metrics. We actually talk about the end users. And you've just run off a list of end users that are really important, because that's who we do the research for. So as you said, it's there to be applied, it's there to be practical, and hopefully to help lots of people. So this is, I guess, where we differ between doing psychology research and a psychologist who is a one-to-one and helps in that regard. But research can help a lot of people. So that's hopefully, that's the thing we aim for. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's just, I'm really excited to have you back. The last time we spoke about your research on TikTok and body image, and we touched on self-compassion, and I wanted to keep going asking you about self-compassion, and I realized then that this is a topic all on its own, and I've got another topic in mind for when I have you back, I think, from some of your more recent research you told me about. But let's dig a little bit more deeply into self-compassion today. And I think the best place to start is if you give us a definition of self-compassion, because it's sometimes thought to be a type of selfishness or self-pity, and it's not that. So please explain what that is.
Okay. In a nutshell, self-compassion is really just learning to be your own best friend. That's it in a nutshell. Okay. But I am going to break it down because I agree with you. I think that there are miscommunications, but also misperceptions about what self-compassion is. So when we are being self-compassionate, we are acknowledging that we're in pain. That's the first step. The second step is that we understand that pain is not unique to us, that it's a shared human experience. And the third step is showing ourselves some kindness. So they're basically the 3 steps of self-compassion. They do take a while to practice. They take a while for it to become second nature. The reason I wanted to go into more of the science of it is because it is important we understand why we develop self-compassion, why we foster it, and why and how we apply it. Okay. It is an emotion regulation strategy. In other words, it helps us in those moments when we're feeling stressed, when we've experienced a disappointment, or we're just experiencing some pain based on whatever context we find ourselves in. When we're feeling sad, angry, disappointed, all of those really negative feelings that we can get drawn into and that tend to spiral out of control, what we're doing is we're tapping into the defense threat system. So this system, we evolved to have this, and it's perfectly fine that we do have it because it helps us understand a stressful situation and how we might cope with that in that moment. But what it does do is it taps into cortisol and adrenaline. And those 2 hormones can make us feel very emotional in that moment. We've all heard of the fight, flight and freeze system. And that, again, we've evolved to have that. So we will either fight in a situation, try to get out of it somehow, we'll flee, or we might even freeze in that situation, depending on how it's affected us. So I guess when we look at it in terms of emotions, because let's face it, we don't live in the wild anymore, those 3 things happen usually when our self-concept is being attacked somehow. In terms of being uncompassionate to ourselves. So this is where we don't show ourselves any kindness. When we're feeling those negative emotions, the fight is us criticizing ourselves, judging ourselves. Okay. So we're fighting against ourselves. We become not just the attacked, but the attacker. When we look at the flight, we isolate ourselves. We tend to think that the feelings that we're experiencing are unique to us and nobody in the world could possibly understand what we're going through. When we go through the fight, flight or freeze system in terms of compassion, the things that we tend to do are uncompassionate. So when we fight, we judge ourselves, we criticize ourselves. So we fight against ourselves. Not only are we attacked, but we also become the attacker. When we're in the flight situation, we tend to isolate ourselves, so we don't want to socialize. We feel that whatever pain we're experiencing is unique to us and couldn't possibly be something that others would understand. And then in the freeze situation, we tend to ruminate. So we get stuck. We get stuck in that situation where we go over and over and over what happened. It doesn't change anything. It happened. But our brain tends to get locked in this, I guess, freeze situation. So when you put those 3 things together, you can see how stress can escalate. We can see how the stress can then turn into things like anxiety and depression. So they're the things that we really, that self-compassion tends to tap into. So when I was talking before about those 3 steps, instead of fighting against ourselves, we show ourselves some understanding and kindness. Instead of fleeing, we understand that everything that we're experiencing is not unique to us. Yeah. It's all part of being human, and we are all works in progress, typically flawed works in progress. Yes. And it doesn't matter how old we are. We're constantly learning from our own experiences. And then the last one, freeze, if we're going to be compassionate to ourselves, then that is about actually not identifying with that problem. learning to see something from a balanced perspective. In other words, and a really good example here is if we have failed at something, and this is something teenagers might experience where they maybe haven't done as well in an exam as they thought they were going to do. And that feeling of disappointment can weigh really heavily on them. But instead of saying, I'm a failure, it's just to say, well, I didn't do as well as I could have done in that. That's okay. I'll pick it up next time. So there is this sense of identifying with that sense of failure or sense of lesser accomplishment. And then there's also a sense of acknowledging that, yes, I feel bad about this, but that's okay.
So, Veya, what is the difference then between self-compassion and self-esteem, for example? We hear about self-esteem all the time, and you're building a young person's self-esteem. Why is that different, and what does the research say on the difference between which is more effective, or is one more effective than the other?
So this is an excellent question because for many years, and we're going back to the 80s, the research was all about helping young people develop their self-esteem. And we thought that that was the best way forward because to define self-esteem, it is the way that we think, that we feel, or that we believe something about ourselves. But ultimately, it is a self-evaluation. You are evaluating yourself based on a domain that's of interest to you or that is important to you. So, for example, having high self-esteem, someone might want to have high self-esteem in a sporting situation.
Okay.
But not necessarily in appearance or not necessarily in academic. So their academic work might not be as important to them as their sporting prowess. They might not worry about what their self-esteem is like in their academic work, but they do worry about it when it comes to their sporting team. So I suppose when we look at self-esteem, it is quite a fluid thing. So it can only be high when we're actually experiencing positive outcomes.
Okay, so when there's success, you feel better about yourself.
Exactly. But what happens when we don't experience that success?
Yes.
When things don't go our way? And let's face it, in most situations, they don't go our way more than they do go our way. So I think what has happened over time is that when we become contingent upon something that's important to us, if that doesn't come through in the way that we expect it, then our self-esteem drops. When our self-esteem drops, then we start to stress, we start to have all of those negative feelings that I was talking about before. It doesn't offer us a way forward. It's just a state. Whereas something like self-compassion is something that we foster, that we develop, and it becomes part of our management process. So when we do experience stress, then we have something to draw upon. We understand how our brain works, we understand how our brain has processed disappointment, and we understand how we can use self-compassion, that caregiving system, to help neutralize and hopefully help to mitigate that stress that comes with that low self-esteem. And we often find that self-compassion and self-esteem can be correlated. So if we do practice self-compassion, we find that our self-esteem will tend to increase as well because, we're not bogged down in that self-evaluation because we know self-compassion is about not judging ourselves and offering ourselves that understanding in the same way that we would if a friend was going through a really difficult time.
How long has this research on self-compassion been going on for? As you said, we all, when I was studying, we were always doing stuff or hearing about stuff on self-esteem, but self-compassion seems to be fairly new. How long has that been going on, and particularly your work in this area?
Yeah, the first time that I came across self-compassion work, I was doing my honours thesis, and I was trying to find an intervention that I thought, would be really useful in the body image space. And I happened to come across this, and I thought, this looks really interesting. What an interesting way to think about something. But I also realized that Dr. Kristen Neff, who developed and validated the self-compassion scale, actually began this research back in 2003. So self-compassion has been around for quite a while. It's coming on, just over 20 years now. And there have been thousands of pieces of research on this, and all of it has really been very positive. So we now have so much evidence to show that self-compassion actually does help in that time when we're feeling stressed.
Okay, so 20 years. Wow, that's quite a bit longer than I actually anticipated. So that's a good thing to know, because as soon as we know something's been around for a while, we know that there is then, longer evidence for it's not something that we have known about for the last 2 years and we're hoping that it works or that there's evidence. That's a significant amount of time.
Exactly. And look, when I say it began in the early 2000s, it took some time to get moving.
Yes.
But certainly in the last 10 years, it really has exploded in the research field.
What is the research saying about the benefits of developing self-compassion? Why does it matter? Why is it important? And why is it important to help teens to even understand that there are benefits?
Yeah. We all know what it feels like to feel stressed. We all know what it feels like not to be able to manage our emotions. And we also all understand what it's like to go through something really difficult.
Yeah.
Nobody ever wants to stay in that place. When we think about compassion itself, it's empathy put into action. So not only are we thinking about how somebody else might be feeling, what are we going to do to help alleviate some of that pain? And all we're doing is the same thing for ourselves. So it is really just about being able to manage a negative situation so that it doesn't spiral out of control. Because one of the things we do know is that if we ruminate, if we think about a stressful situation, we know it can develop into depression. We know it can develop into anxiety. And these are things that nobody wants to live with. They become things that affect us on a daily level.
And that's fascinating, because the rumination particularly, I know adults ruminate, but teenagers particularly will ruminate when something's gone wrong or something hasn't happened very well in their lives. And you're absolutely right, that rumination then they develop anxiety or depression or depressive symptoms, and it seems to spiral into all sorts of other issues for them. I love the fact that self-compassion is almost an answer to beginning to work towards moving away from that habit of rumination for teens.
And it is interesting how you talk about teenagers, because let's think about their brain and how it's developing at this stage. We know that the limbic system, which is the emotional center of our brain, is supercharged in the teenage years. It actually accelerates in development much faster than the front part of our brain, or the front part of teenagers' brains, which is the prefrontal cortex. So that's our reasoning part of the brain. And that takes a little bit longer to fully develop. I think it's around sort of mid-20s. When they're still teenagers, that limbic system is working over time. And it's the very focus of everything. So it's not surprising that they tend to ruminate. It's not surprising that they think that whatever's happening to them is unique to them and no one could possibly understand, in particular parents.
Yes.
So we have these two terms in adolescent development, which are the personal fable and the imaginary audience.
Just expand on those two, please. I know those, but a lot of my listeners might not be aware of what that is.
Yeah. The imaginary audience, as we would imagine, is they think that they are the focus of everybody's observation, that observation then turns into judgment, that people are constantly evaluating them. So imagine if you were on stage and what you might be thinking the audience is thinking of you. That's what they start to feel in those teenage years. And the personal fable it goes back to that feeling of, you cannot understand what I'm going through. It's really severely affecting me and nobody could possibly understand, in particular mum and dad.
Yes.
So they're the two things that we do talk about quite a bit in adolescent development. And sure, not every child is going to feel this way, but on average, most of them feel it from time to time. And so again, this is where we know something like self-compassion can help, because that personal fable of having a painful experience being unique to you, we know it isn't.
Yes.
And so understanding that that's not unique to you is really powerful for them. It helps them feel less alone. And the imaginary audience is exactly the same. That's that evaluation. So what they think others are perceiving them to be, they also perceive themselves to be. So, and often with that comes judgment and criticism. So we know that, again, those things tap into the better parts of self-compassion, that self-kindness, that common humanity, that mindfulness.
Veya, can you tell us a little bit about your pilot project that you did in schools? Because I know you've been really focusing on this area, researching into this area of self-compassion in young people. What does your pilot project look like, and what did you find when you did work on self-compassion with young people?
Yeah, we worked with a fantastic school, actually, and this program was a 4-week program, so we ran it. Okay. I facilitated it, but the teacher was in the class with me at the time. So it was one classroom, co-ed, and they were aged between, I think it was 12 and 14. So it was about 12 and a half on average, the average age of the class. What we did in this classroom, we had some workbooks, but we actually talked a lot. We sort of went through the 3 steps of self-compassion. But what we found was a really great system to help, in particular, teenagers who can often forget things, how to remember it and how to use it. I delivered a traffic light system to them. So what that involves, the red, the amber, and the green light. Okay. The red light represents mindfulness. And that's the first step of practicing self-compassion. So this is where we acknowledge our feelings. Red obviously means stop.
Okay.
Stop, because if you continue going the way you're going to end up ruminating. That stress will be unmanageable. So stop and acknowledge the feeling, whatever that feeling is, as unpleasant as it might be. Just acknowledge it. The moment we do that, we actually make room for it instead of fighting against it.
So it's like acknowledging I feel pain, or I feel embarrassment, or I feel stupid in front of people, or no one likes me. It's really acknowledging what you are going through or what you're feeling.
Yeah. And you can say something, whatever makes you feel good about that situation. When I say good, teenagers, they can use words like, this really sucks.
Yes.
Like, this is really painful. I can't believe this is going on. That's okay. Those things can still be used. So I'm not asking teenagers to use language that doesn't seem comfortable for them or relatable.
Excellent.
They should be able to use words that mean something to them.
Okay.
So there is a difference between acknowledging the emotion and acknowledging what happened. So stay away from what happened. Just focus on the emotion.
Okay, that's important.
Yeah. And one piece of information that I came across was that our emotions actually only last for 90 seconds.
Yeah, that's fascinating, because it feels like it consumes you.
Yeah.
But 90 seconds, wow, and even as an adult, that feels manageable.
It does.
If I know that's what how long it's going to last, it helps me think, okay, if I can sit with this horrible feeling for 90 seconds, wow. So expand on that.
Let's just work with that as a 90-second thing. Something has happened and I'm feeling, angry. As a teenager, I'm feeling really angry that this has happened. So all I would do is acknowledge it and say, I'm really, really angry right now. This has really triggered me and I'm hurting. That's all that needs to be done in that first step. That's the red light.
And we're still in the mindfulness?
Yes.
Okay.
So we're now going to move from the mindfulness to so these should be quite seamless. We shouldn't be sort of necessarily thinking about them as separate bits. They should kind of flow from one to the other.
All right.
But to start with, we would need these little reminders of what to do. So the amber light is, we sort of see orange as a kind of unifying color. I always think it's a really energetic and nice color. So when we think of amber, it's a time to think about how this particular feeling, so many other people have been in this situation, are possibly in this situation right now. This is not unique to me, and I shouldn't feel alone in this feeling. And then we talk about something that we call the soothing touch, because let's think about a situation where we've just seen a child fall over. Our first instinct is to run over to the child and put our hands on their knee or whatever they've hurt, help them up.
Yes.
It's that sense of touch that triggers that oxytocin. So if we were to find something that helps us in that moment, that can be anything from just placing your hand on your chest, putting it on your tummy, even just a hand behind the neck can really just help soothe some of that stress.
That motion that you've just demonstrated on camera, your hand behind your neck, that is so what we do when we feel stress, isn't it? That's fascinating.
Yeah. And half the time we don't realize that we're actually applying some soothing touches to ourselves. So again, we know that the touch and warmth, anything that's warm, sets off that oxytocin and it makes us feel safe and secure. When we get that feeling of safety and security, we're in a much better place to then offer ourselves some self-kindness. You can keep your hand there, do whatever you please, but in that moment, just kind of say something like, may I be strong, may I be patient in this moment. I just need to understand myself right now. I know I'm a good person. I know that whatever has happened, I'm going to get through this. I'm good enough. Think about all of the things that you might say to your friend if they were going through the exact same situation as you. You would offer them support, and that support would often be unconditional, but we never do that to ourselves.
It's funny because as you say that, I know people will be balking almost at that, where you speak to yourself and saying you're going to be okay, or you are good enough, or you are worth it, or whatever it is. It almost feels weird to do it, but you're absolutely right when you frame it that you're talking to yourself in the same way that you might talk to someone you love deeply or a close friend. Why would we not do that to ourselves when we are going through pain?
It's really interesting. And I think that's just our society. It's our culture. The compassion that we have is often for others.
Yes.
And particularly as parents, the compassion we have is for our kids. We often put ourselves after the kids. So as long as the kids are okay, then hopefully we'll be okay. But the best compassion that we can start with is compassion for ourselves, because if we show ourselves compassion, then we're more likely to model that behavior. And our children are more likely to then take on board some of those things that we do. And we can start it in really simple places like the car, because let's face it, the car is one place where most of us feel stress, whether it's something we've done or something that someone else has done to us. So, and you're already in a place where you're probably going to see a traffic light. So it's a terrific place to kind of put into practice some self-compassion. I've done this myself where, I have been in a stress situation where the person in front of me is just moving way too slowly and I need to be somewhere yesterday. And, I can feel the stress kind of coming right up to the tips of my fingers and my cheeks. And in that moment, I just kind of put my hands on the steering wheel in a nice calming way. And I just go, okay, this is stressful. I'm probably going to be late. That's okay. No one's going to die. It's fine. Yeah. I then think about, oh my goodness, how many other people must be sitting in their car right now, kind of feeling very similar things to me. And immediately you really do realize how trivial sometimes our stress can be.
Yeah.
And then I just go into self-kindness mode and it's like, it's okay. You're going to be late. A lot of people are often late to things. I can explain this. Or, if I can and I can pull over, I can send a message. It just puts me into a place of management. And I think really when we look at self-compassion, it is really just about managing high expectations, but also managing distressing situations. And that what I've just talked about is very mild.
Yes.
But it's always a good place to start, I think, rather than trying to use something that maybe you're not used to a far bigger problem.
Yeah. And so in bigger areas of stress, like you said, some of them are trivial, being caught up in traffic, but some of them are very stressful situations.
Yes.
And you absolutely can still use this then, or our teens can use this then to practice being mindful, acknowledging what they feel, and then that kindness to themselves.
Exactly right. It's funny because going back to the school, when we discussed, because at the beginning of each lesson, what we would do is I would ask them where they may have used self-compassion in the past week, in real life.
Yes.
Often they would talk about how they've used it with their parents.
Wow.
So, some stressful situation that may have happened. And sometimes they say to their parents, hey, have you thought about doing this? Have you thought about, thinking about your problem in this way? And so it sort of brings up the conversation about how parents sometimes forget that they're acting out a lot of their stresses in front of the children.
Yes.
But it also provides them a really good opportunity to put into practice the things they learn in school. And schools are a fantastic place for this sort of program to be delivered because it actually reaches children, whether they're at risk or not. And self-compassion isn't just about people who are at risk of anything in particular, because it's all about regulating our emotions, and we all experience emotions. So it is a terrific place to do this. We did actually finish the program with painting. So they got into groups and they all painted something as a group that represented self-compassion to them. It was probably the most fun I've had in a long time.
That sounds incredible. So each their own painting, but they were all...
no, they had to work in a group.
So
it was in a group of probably about 5 students. That took a lot because obviously people have different tastes, different styles. So they really had to work in a very self-compassionate way in how they kind of approached the painting. But the paintings were fantastic and they were so pleased with them afterwards, which was excellent.
Incredible.
So, these things have to take time though. And when we practice something like self-compassion, because you mentioned before, this is not something that feels natural to us.
No.
So it takes time, start off with the milder things first. And then when the larger problems eventuate, we're probably in a far better position to use the self-compassion.
Yes. Yeah. If I have a listener now thinking, how I love this idea, where can I start? What's the first step for me as a parent to teach my child self-compassion or your traffic light? Where could they start?
You could start anywhere, even if it's something that's to do with an exam coming up or something stressful that might be coming up. So rather than wait for the problem to happen, it's maybe a good idea to think about, all right, well, you're probably going to experience all of these feelings coming up to the exam. So let's work through some of that. What are you feeling right now? Like maybe it's a week away. So they might talk about the stress levels that they're feeling.
Okay.
And then it's a good opportunity to say or ask, do you think other students are going to be feeling the same thing? Even those who often achieve those really high marks, do you think they'll be stressed? And then it's a good opportunity to talk about that and talk about how kids their own age feel in general about that topic. Practice some kindness and sometimes even try a guided meditation. You can find some really good ones that last 5 minutes on YouTube. It's really worthwhile doing some of those with the child, so parent and child together. They are a really good relaxation activity to engage in. But, just learning that soothing touch, finding out what's comfortable for each person, for each child, because it could be different for each of them.
Yeah.
And then they can use that. I had so many students say to me when I went into the exam, all I could hear was my heart beating. So I put my hand on my chest or I put my hand on my tummy, whatever was comfortable for them. And they said the warmth that came from my hand, immediately I could feel my heart rate just starting to slow down. So that's already a good thing because that soothing touch can do so much. It can actually include the mindfulness, common humanity, and self-kindness all in one step. All of these things can be introduced to the child at a stage where they're not necessarily experiencing too much stress. But, we know that stress builds up as they get older. Another thing that I would recommend is talking about their social media use. Absolutely. And they can do that once a week. And they can talk about the things that maybe stress them out on social media, how they're going to manage those emotions. Because, we've talked so much about the, increasing that age of access to social media.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons being is that developmentally, the brain of a 13 to 15-year-old is often not able to process or manage the emotions that come with watching certain content. in the same way that someone 16 or over could. And I'm not saying that even 16 to 19 is, is excellent, but it's certainly better than early teens. So I think just discussing social media use, the kind of content they're watching, and it also gives parents a really good opportunity to discuss the kind of content that their teen might be engaging with.
As a parent, we might say to our teens, do you ever see anything distressing or something that doesn't make you feel good about yourself? And so often their first response will be, nah, I'm fine. Social media doesn't affect me. It's good. So what I've tried sometimes as a parent is to talk about how social media has raised my stress levels, because it does. And just start opening up those conversations. And I think when teens brush us off, it's so important to not just go, oh, all right, well, they're fine.
Yeah.
Know that sometimes we have to have those conversations a few times and talk about their friends, what their friends might be thinking or feeling when they're on social media. And by the time you ask a teen once or twice, the majority of them eventually do come out and go, yep, it does make me stressed, or this influencer makes me feel worried about my body, or whatever it might be.
Yeah. And these are all, really important things to a teenager. Their appearance is all tied up in their identity.
Yeah.
And, we know through social media that popularity and the metrics are so important to them because they feel that it validates who they are.
Yes.
It's a difficult time for them, and I think that's something we need to acknowledge. But one way, that we could broach the subject is to say, how would you feel about coming off social media for 7 days? How do you think it might help you? How do you think it might hinder you?
Yes.
So it sort of opens up a slightly different conversation, and it's one that will probably trigger some very quick emotions.
Absolutely. Because a lot of them would go, no way, there's no way I'm doing that. So it's not, I like that question, because it's not like we're assuming they'll go, oh, Mum, what a fantastic idea. Thank you. I think I'm coming off social media for 7 days. But the question itself will lead to all these other discussions. I love that idea. It's, well, how would that help you, or how would it not help you?
Yes, exactly. Because then you can actually start to talk about some emotions that they might not otherwise be willing to raise with you. Beautiful. Because as you said, most of them, they're not that interested in talking to parents. They're far more interested in talking to their peers. Parents kind of become a boring part of their life. As parents, I think it's important to find interesting ways to have these discussions with them. And one thing that comes from, coming off social media is to say, well, look, what would happen if you lost everything? What would happen if you no longer had your possessions, or all your achievements were taken away from you, or all your friends were taken away from you? What sort of feelings do you think you would have? And the reason that kind of question is important is because it helps them understand their own self-worth. So we were talking before about self-esteem, and self-esteem we know is fluid, as we spoke about before. Self-worth is a bit more stable, and it's something that they can build because it is really about how much they value and respect themselves. That has nothing to do with achievements, nothing to do with their peer group. It really is more a self-reflection of who they are rather than a self-evaluation. Yes. So it's just a really nice way to kind of get them to see that they have really good attributes and that they don't need to please others. They don't need, the validation from everybody else. So these things are really important to be instilled during the teenage years, because we know that those things they're things they're going to take with them into young adulthood.
Yeah. So Veya, what is your greatest hope then for this work on self-compassion and teens?
I think my greatest hope really is to establish a program that will work in schools, that schools will be happy to include and incorporate in the social and emotional well-being curriculum. And I've already been looking at those aspects and trying to map things onto the learning outcomes so that it's not an extra burden on teachers. So it actually sort of blends in with what the curriculum is expecting of teachers to deliver to students, but also the learning outcomes that students should be ticking off at certain age groups. And I'm kind of currently working on developing something for sort of early teenagers, mid-teenagers and late teenagers, so that a program like this can actually be run, pretty much all the way through their high school years, because I think that their brain changes, their situations change, their likes change, their approaches to society change. And I think all of these things could work really well hand in hand with having self-compassion skills. And we know they're teachable. So the research tells us that they're teachable skills, and they're skills that can stay with us for life. And they're also skills that hopefully, they can teach to their own children one day.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Veya. Thank you so much for being a guest again. I will certainly be having you back to talk about more of your other research.
It will be a pleasure to come back. It's been a pleasure being with you again. Thank you to your viewers for listening.
I think what stood out to me today with Veya was when she mentioned that the first step in self-compassion is acknowledging that you are in pain. I think I kind of went, I hadn't thought of that before. That idea of I'm feeling so hurt, or I'm embarrassed, or I'm feeling afraid of being judged, or whatever we might be feeling. I'd never thought of that being the very first step of self-compassion. And so I think in my mini episode, I want to explore the whole idea of self-talk and self-kindness a little bit more. I'm thinking of looking at what will that look like in practical terms. So in the same way we're compassionate with people that we love or we care for, especially as adults, what does self-compassion look like in real terms? If you found this episode helpful or gained some useful insight into it, please subscribe and review wherever you get your podcasts, and consider sharing it with your friends and family. I hope to see you next episode, where I will chat with you more about self-compassion. But in the meantime, keep parenting with your teen's future adult in mind.
Hope 1032. Thanks for listening.